Good evening and welcome to Fireside Fairytales. If you've never been here before, or if you're one of the many people that subscribed in the week I was away, welcome. You probably came in on that rather popular, popular for this channel anyways, video about playing a solo D&D game. This isn't that show. We don't play the tabletop games on this show. We read old folklore. Which I think you'll enjoy, but if that's not what you're here for, I'm letting you know right now. But if you are watching this, and you are watching it live, and you do want to join in, down in the corner there will be a live chat, which is already bustling, and by most records, is considered the greatest live chat in all of YouTube history. Not my words, but words that have been said. Anyways, if you're not watching this live, then you have another advantage. Down in the description below, there will be timestamps that let you jump ahead to the beginning of each story, depending on which one you care about. And of course, tonight's theme, we're talking about medicine, because I have been sick for 4 weeks. The worst of it was the last week, which is why there was no shows. But I think we're going to dive into some German folklore and see what my options are for cures. But before I get into that, before I give you some framing and get into the stories proper, I need to say hello to that very generous and beautiful group of people I call live chat. GS says, good evening. I see the theme for tonight is relevant. Indeed, we must find a cure, and I can think of no other option than German folklore. Jumpstore agrees. They notice the theme. Witchery says, hey, GS. And I'll say to you, Witchery, hello. And also hello to Jumpstore and GS and Uncle Kitty for tuning in and watching. It's very kind of you. Tammy is here. Says, good evening, everyone. I hope you're all doing well. Glad to see you back, Rory. Sure did miss you all. Well, thank you, Tammy. I'm glad to see you as well. Missed you as well. Zombie Wolf is here. It says, hi, guys. Hi, Zombie Wolf. And Witchery notes, so we are at 205 subscribers. Congrats. Yes. And Janera is here. Is this an early break, Janera, or are you not working tonight? But it's good to see you either way. We jumped up about 25 subscribers. I'm sure no one goes back and checks videos as much as me. So for people who don't know, that Pocket Hex playthrough we did got 1,200 views, which is far and away the most popular show we've ever done on anything on this channel. Witchery says, I was so concerned about our dear Rory, I actually remembered what day this is on. Oh, thank you, Witchery. You don't need to be concerned. Well, maybe you do. It was a pretty miserable sickness. And it's not gone, by the way. Just the worst of it's gone, and now we all hope that it doesn't turn into something bacterial. But let's not get into that. Oh, and Just Fleece It Out is here, making cutlets. Ooh, chicken or pork? Let's take a look at what we're talking about to us today. So we're talking about cures and folklore, and actually, I don't necessarily have the best selection here because I've kind of burned through some of the better ones in other themes. But there's a ton of different little cures and talked about in folklore, and I'm not really going to go into what I would consider sort of folk medicine stuff where it talks about specific herbs and whatnot. Those things exist. I'm more interested in the ones that carry narrative heft, stuff that cures curses or whatever else. But what we're actually going to look at is a few examples of cures, but also people who manage the cures, medicine people, in German folklore specifically. And the gist of it is, as I mentioned, I've been sick with 2 sicknesses in a row for a total of 4 weeks. There is an underlying reason for that has largely been resolved, but unfortunately the overlying reason is I was sick a lot. That second sickness, being one of the worst I've ever had, is still lingering. So naturally, I opened my folklore collection and searched for my options on curing it. The way I see it, I have 3, maybe 4 options, although we'll go through the first one, which I think is the least promising, to get well. And at least in my German collection, that's about all I could really find. There's going to be a bit of that. So let's get into what are clearly my only options in 2023 if I can't beat this illness with my own immune system. I've never heard of a clinic. Witchery says they were also still sick. Aw. Hopefully it wasn't what I had. It was a violent burning of anything that produces mucus. Now we're going to go into the first story here, which is called The Fickle Sava of Tägerig, which is about a less successful form of cures on somebody. But I do need to make a note here. If you guys are already pretty familiar with the reformist Catholic divide, especially around Germany in this eras that we read, then you can kind of tune out for about 2 minutes. But for those who are not, because you're going to need the context for what exactly this story is about, a note on sectarian slander among Christians. So this first story, it just assumes, because it's folklore, you knew already a fair bit about a multi-century, let's politely call a dispute between the Catholic Church and what are named collectively the Reformists. Now, the Reformists, even at the time, but especially now, have splintered into 20 dozen sects since, and I'm not going to go over all of that, or even the two major divisions, which were Calvinists and Lutherans. What I am going to say is, instead of talking about what their theological disputes are, or how they define all these schisms about, fate and not fate and choice and hierarchy and whatever else, instead, just note that the Calvinists and the Lutherans saw the Catholics as being kind of, maybe this isn't the right word, but let's roughly call them heretics, and the Catholics saw the Reformists, what they were collectively called, the same way. And that informs folklore about this matter. War and rebellions were fought over these issues, and so it's not crucial that you grasp the minutiae here of the theological differences. Just understand that the story we're going to read is building on that prejudice and telling a moral tale about mingling with the wrong Christian sects. I'm going to have myself a drink of water, one of many, and then we'll get into the story. People are talking about not being, not having sicknesses for a while and so on. Yeah, I'm a person who masks still basically every time I go out. So to be honest, the second sickness, we have no idea where it came from. I was still sort of isolating from the first one. The best theory we have is maybe it came in on an Amazon package, but the timeline doesn't quite work out. Okay. So let's get into what I would call the most fruitless cure of German folklore, which is our first story. Our first story is called The Fickle Sava of Tägerig. Just going to turn down the sound a bit here, and then I'll reintroduce that. Our first story is called The Fickle Sava of Tägerig. And it comes to us from Sunken Castle's Evil Poodles, or translated anyways, Sunken Castle's Evil Poodles, which of course is a translation by Jürgen Hubert, who has his own Patreon. He is a contemporary, I would count him as a friend, or at least a colleague, in this hobby, and is an excellent Patreon that you should definitely support, and I'll have it in a link below when the video's over. More than a human lifespan ago, a very poor man lived in Tägerig. In one of those in one of the final houses which lie along the country road to Mellingen. And as he was embittered from being abandoned by all the world, he lost his faith in Catholicism, without really intending to do so. And in the same manner, without truly wanting or even realizing it, he foolishly signed himself over to the devil. The tailor journeyman, who was a tenant of his at the time, told how this had occurred. One day, a distinguished-looking man who was dressed in black and who did not look odd in any way other than having a twisted foot, which, if you know your folklore, is not a good sign, stepped into his chamber. He introduced himself as a businessman working for a merchant association based in Zofingen and Basel, for which he was searching for subscribers in the Catholic regions of Switzerland. Every member would be guaranteed a certain amount of prosperity, and those in need would receive support. The condition for this was that they must swear off the saints, stop attending masses, but distribute the treaties which would be sent to them from the association. The traveler then pulled out a book and read a large number of names of rich dynasties from Zofingen, who all had been members of this extensive association for a long time. Well, the poor farmer noticed that these were the only names of people who were part of the Reformed denomination, and no Catholics were among them. Very important point. He figured that that which was advantageous to such distinguished traders would be of use to such a common man as himself, and since there was no talk of any further conditions, he took this book of subscribers and wrote his name next to the others. For this, he immediately received 2 different things into his house, which he had to use and treat according to strict rules. The first were images of all the members of the association. He needed to hang them inside a locked room and look at them daily if anything had changed with any individual portrait. For such an image whose color was waning indicated a member which had become unfaithful to the association. And one which had actually been torn apart and was full of holes presaged the death of said member, which would be the inevitable punishment for unfaithfulness. For another, the farmer received an animal into his house. This was called the Geldschütze, and it needed to be assigned its own corner of the house as well. And Hubert notes there, Geldschütze is moneylender. Google said money bumbler or something like that, which was funny. Don't trust Google Translate on that. Obviously, Jurgen knows better. Just like you need to leave a single egg behind with hens, a small coin must be put beneath this creature every evening. Then this would grow to a whole heap of identical coins overnight, and you could fill your pockets with it every day. However, you should only take away a certain sum from the animal, and under no circumstances all of it, for then it would lose its strength, and you would have to die soon after. In this manner the man proceeded, adhered to the contract which he had entered, and lived in prosperity, but later he fell ill to a long-running and strange sickness. But the treatments which the doctor prescribed were equally strange and money-consuming. For example, he had to eat 10 pounds of toads every day, an entire bucketful, and drink an entire bottle of cod liver oil. The tailor who had rented a room in the man's house at the time had noticed that these quantities had been transported into the house on a daily basis and were regularly consumed by the time evening arrived, but the sick man did not get better. Instead, he tortured himself with self-reproach. that he had fallen from his old faith, and sometimes said that if he were to recover, he would go back into the Catholic village church and pay for the reading of a mass, which was a way of, you were sponsoring mass as a way of atonement. But he was unable to get out of his bed, and finally decided to write to the association in Zofingen and ask for a pill that would be effective against his suffering. Make note of that. Meanwhile, the people of Tägerig had already learned the kind of relationship he had with the reformists in Zofingen. Thus, they intercepted the response from the postal messenger, and the letter was addressed to the fence-sitting Xaver, and stated that they would send him the asked-for pill on the next Friday at 3 o'clock, and that would be as large as a bomb. Well, the town councillors then tore the letter apart and went into the house of the patient on the designated Friday, and he was lying in the hindmost chambers and allowed no one to get close. They thus waited in the main room until 3 o'clock, and suddenly a dull thud could be heard, as if a cannon had been fired at a distance of many hours. A short groan was audible from the chamber at the same moment, and when they rushed inside, he was lying in his bed and had been killed. No blood was flowing, but his nose and mouth had been shot up, and his entire face was darkened by black powder. At the same time, a gargantuan toad was sitting beneath the bed, and it remained under there until the man was fully buried. It then marched out of the house in the company of an unknown black dog, which had suddenly appeared. And now a black dog with blood-red eyes runs around the row of houses which lies in the direction of Nessenbank, and it doesn't back away from anyone. Oh, sorry, my leg is falling asleep here. People are checking their feet. Yeah. The feet are always a bit of a giveaway. I always wondered if that's a reference to, the biblical thing about you can know a man by his feet. But obviously there's the more obvious thing of like having hooved feet is a sign of the devil. But twisted feet can be as well. And in this case, it's clearly the case. They say that in the beginning of the story, but also we get the black dog at the end, and the black dog is not always the devil, but often. Zombie Wolf says black dog with blood red eyes appears. Me, who's a good puppers? Yeah, I think people had a different relationship with dogs back then, but not for fickle reasons. It's worth noting that we deal with domesticated dogs. Wild dogs are maybe not the worst animal in the world, but they are pretty vicious. And it's not hard to understand why they would associate it with chaos and menace of the devil. So I haven't been able to find 10 pounds of toads. I do like frog legs. It didn't specify if they have to be cooked. Felt like maybe they don't. But I would prefer them to be cooked. I don't know if the cooking would ruin the medicine. The cod liver oil. That's a popular one from the old time. I don't see how that's going to help with my sickness, but first option's always worth looking at. But I do feel like this one clearly didn't work. So maybe this isn't the cure I'm looking for. Let's carry on to the next one. And have some water, too. Witchery says, feral dogs are worse than wolves. You don't want them around. Yeah, that's what I've heard as well. I mean, nobody blames them for being how they are. They're trying to survive. They are scavengers. But they're vicious. Vicious things. Just waiting for this thing to catch up. We're at the limits of what it can do. Wow, that's going slow. Uncle Kitty says common toads max out at 2.8 ounces. That's a lot of toads. Oh, God, yeah. You have to be cooking them beforehand, because if you ate that many toads alive, like, that would be horrible. You could just... I don't even want to go into it. My graphic writing mind can describe it, but I'm not going to. Witchery says feral dogs have a much more aggressive approach to humans and livestock usually, yeah. Yeah, so I mean, we don't have to take it too seriously. This is all silliness, but if you happen to be in a place where you are around wild dogs, please don't carry over your perceptions of dogs to a wild dog, a domesticated dog. They're not the same. You will get hurt and potentially killed. Anyways, I mentioned that so that, to understand why the devil is characterized as a dog. It's not a thing we would often do anymore, but at the time it definitely makes sense. Actually, I'm going to do this. There we go. A happy little town. Well, forest. Now, this next story, I can find no evidence that I've done it before. I lost my list of stuff I've done before when the other computer cooked itself. So it's possible I've read this. I have personally read this before, but that doesn't mean I've read it on stream before. So, I mean, if that is the case, it is the case. I probably read it a while ago anyways. Zombie Wolf says they're just scared and hungry. They had the wildness bred out of them through years of domestic evolution. All dogs are good. Well, I don't know if... I mean, my opinion is that animals are neither good nor bad. I think those constructs don't really mean anything. I think animals just are seeking to survive. And they have different modes of approaching that. And some of them are more contrary to our survival than others. I don't want to apply models of ethics to creatures that have no self-reflection. Anyways. This one is called Dr. Paracelsus and the Devil. And it also comes to us from Jürgen Hubert's collection Sunken Castles, Evil Poodles, who you can support at the pinned comment down below if we're no longer live. The Spitzwald forest lies in the mountains above Hotting, where the Stongensteig begins. My apologies to the entire country of Germany. As a protection against falling rocks, a part of it may not be cut down, and thus is called Ultebahnwald, or Old Forbidden Forest. An old legend from Hotting tells the following about this part of the forest. During the time when the miracle doctor, Paracelsus, lived in Innsbruck, he liked to roam the forests of the region, and in this manner he arrived on this footpath one early Sunday morning, where he heard someone call him by name, Paracelsus! Paracelsus! The doctor looked around, and only after long searching did he realize that the voice came out of a nearby fir tree. There was a hole on its right side, which was closed by a small wooden plug in which 3 crosses had been carved. The voice could be heard from behind this plug, and after a short conversation, it could be determined that nobody else but the devil himself was stuck behind it, who had been forced there by a learned exorcist from Innsbruck. "And what will you give me if I let you out?" asked Paracelsus. "What do you want?" asked the voice from the tree. "Give me," commanded Paracelsus, "pro primo a medicine which can cure all diseases, pro secundo a tincture which can turn everything into gold, and pro tertio—" "Stop!" shouted the voice. "Things that come in three are repugnant to me and inhibit my arts, but I can provide you with these two desired things." Paracelsus thus was satisfied with medicine and tincture, pulled the plug from the hole in the trunk, and soon a black spider crawled out of it and down into the moss and vanished when touching the ground. And in that moment a scrawny man rose up from the ground who had glowing eyes and assorted traits which indicated that he was no saint. But he was very polite and smooth, and expressed his thanks for the rescue in well-chosen words. And then he broke off a hazel branch and hit a naked rock with it. The rock parted with a and he went into its crevice. Soon he returned with two transparent receptacles which were sealed at the top, and which he handed over to the doctor. "The yellow substance here," he said, "is the gold tincture, and the white one is the medicine." After this, the gap in the rock closed, and the deal was concluded. "Now, I will take my revenge on that rascal of an exorcist in Innsbruck," said the devil, and turned round to leave. But Paracelsus had something else in mind. He wanted to save that practitioner of the black arts, since he was his colleague. And furthermore, he wished to thumb his nose at the revenge-bent devil. Thus the doctor said, "You would do well to do that. But that exorcist must be a mighty powerful man, since he managed to put you into a small hole. Indeed, he squeezed you and made you smaller and transformed you into a spider. And even the devil cannot transform into a spider." "Oh, hogwash," laughed the devil mockingly. "Any proper devil can transform into a spider. And there is no art to crawling, as we have learned from certain people on earth. For all this, no exorcist is needed. And, don't speak such nonsense into the world. You cannot fool me," replied Paracelsus. "I've heard of infernal hauntings all my life. I've seen how you can turn yourself into a havishie or a salamander or similar vermin. But turning into such a small spider? Well, this takes rather more than that." The devil laughed again and said, "Ha! Have you not seen how I crawled out of the hole as a spider?" "Oh, that was illusion and trickery," said the doctor. "You are nothing more than a bag of lies and a braggart. A greater lord has broken the power of you devils a long time ago. Indeed, I would give up my 2 little miracle bottles if you could convince me otherwise." "It's a bet," shouted the stupid devil. And he indeed turned into a spider once more and crawled into the hole within the fir tree and yelled, "Now look, the bottles are mine." And Paracelsus shouted into the hole, "I don't believe so," and pushed the little plug in, which he concealed in his hand quickly. And he hammered it shut tightly, cut 3 crosses above it with a knife, and the devil was imprisoned once more. chat is talking about extinction events with animals. And I don't think I'm going to be able to catch up. You guys carry on. Now, the gambit there, tricking the devil into doing something that gets him trapped, is an old one, is one that we've definitely seen before. But that specific account, I'm not sure if I've read here. Now, I have looked around, and Paracelsus was a real person. So those potions might have existed, and I could have used them. However, seems like he lived quite a few centuries ago, and I'm gonna guess that the tincture and the medicine is, well, it's gone. So I don't think I'm gonna be able to get cured off of that. Which means that we need to look at some other options. The first one doesn't look promising. I'm not too fond of devil cures anyways, if I can avoid them. The second one seems, the most promising of the devil cures, but I don't think it exists anymore. But there is somebody I could maybe ask if I could get a flight out to Germany. And that is Hubeck, who we've talked about on this stream before, who is, well, you'll see. This story is called The Silver Fir Cone. And it is, again, one I may have read before, to be honest. It's one I've personally read before. I could find no evidence that I've read it before, but I'm sure I have. But it doesn't matter. This is called The Silver Fir Cone. And it comes to us again from Jürgen Hubert's collection, Sunken Castles, Evil Poodles, who you can support at the pinned comment down below. Many, many years ago, a miner lived in Gront, who had a fir cone fashioned out of the purest silver in his cupboard. And this fir cone looked as natural as the one that had grown on a tree. Unsurprisingly, many have wondered how a miner was able to attain such a treasure. And so he told his story to many people. For his great-grandfather had been a miner as well. Once he had fallen sick for many weeks. Same. Times back then were expensive. Times back now are. And miners in those days did not yet receive mercy payments when they fell sick. That's sick payments. I'm sure you can put that together. For this practice was only established later, but he had 7 living children, and thus bread and everything else they needed to live was scarce. And he and his wife almost lost all courage. Once the woman stood in front of the door and mused to herself how she could be able to get something to eat for the children, and then she thought, "You could go forth, gather a basket full of fir cones, and sell them that should fetch at least something." And thus she went on her way, and as she walked on the path to the forest and contemplated her fate, tears welled up in her eyes, and she sat down next to the path and buried her face in her hands. But after a while she thought, "This doesn't help. You must rise up and continue, or we will have to go begging." But when she looked up, a small, old, strangely dressed man with an ice-gray beard stood before her, and he observed her for a long time. He asked her what was troubling her. She replied that it was no use, for he would be unable to help her anyways. But he was friendly and said, "People often don't know what others are capable of. Thus don't be shy about telling me what is troubling you." And so she took heart and told him everything, that her husband had been ill for such a long time, and that she had 7 living children and no single bite of bread in the house, that she had pawned off everything and that the other people no longer wanted to suffer them in the house, and thus she wanted to gather a bunch of fir cones and buy bread with them. Well, the little man with the gray beard consoled her. "You shouldn't despair. Everything will work out in the end. And if you want to have good fir cones, then you should go to Hubechenstein Rock without fear." And then he wished her a good morning and walked into the shrubs next to the path. Well, the woman, on the other hand, who went to Hubechenstein, there she put her basket on the ground and searched for fir cones, and as she began to search, the fir cones dropped towards her from all sides, right and left, from above and from all shrubs nearby. And then she thought that small boys had hidden themselves in Hubechenstein and wanted to mock her, and that this was all the little man's fault. She thus lifted up her basket again and fled, for she didn't want the projectiles to blind her eyes. However, this proved unnecessary, for the fir cones all had dropped into her basket. But people in so much despair do not pay attention to everything. In this manner, she went away from Hubechenstein and reached another spot. And there she filled her basket, and she did not need to gather many more fir cones in order to complete this task. And so afterwards she walked home, and as she walked, the basket seemed to become heavier and heavier, and she had to rest frequently before she reached her abode. This seemed strange to her, but she didn't think about this further. Once she got there, she went into the wood shack, and where she wanted to empty the basket and then return to the forest. But then numerous silver fir cones fell out of it, and she froze in amazement. But she did not want to keep the fir cones, for she thought them uncanny. In other words, she thought it might be like a fey trick or a curse. She even worried that the little man might have been Satan himself. And thus she went into the chamber to her husband and told him of everything that had occurred to her. And she described the small man to him and asked him if all of this was proper and if it was all right to keep the fir cones. It was then that her husband told her that she may keep everything, and that the small guy had been the Hubec, who had helped other poor people in the past, and who, if you watched my Dwarven stream, is the king of the dwarves, who lives below Hubechenstein, which is a gigantic rock that still exists in Germany, to my knowledge. The next morning, she was unable to find peace of mind. She felt compelled to venture into the forest once more, perhaps to visit the Hubec again, so that she could thank him at least. And indeed, as she returned to the same location, the little man with the ice-gray beard was waiting for her, and asked her whether she had found nice fir cones yesterday. But as she began to thank him and told him how they were now saved from all their deprivations, Hubec laughed, gave her a bundle of herbs, and told her to brew her husband a potion from these, and then he would soon recover. And after this, he once more walked into the shrubs along the path. The woman, however, went home and prepared the potion immediately after, and her husband recovered, and they lived together in happiness for a long time. But they brought the silver to the mint and attained incredible riches from it. They assisted many poor people with their wealth, but they kept one of the fir cones as an everlasting keepsake, and this is the fir cone that the miner had kept in his cupboard. Zombie Wolf says, people don't often know what others are capable of. Wow, this just got deep, brah, and people were agreeing with that. I think there is definitely depth in folklore. I mean, all our stories grow out of its soil. So, there's depth in stories. But indeed, she didn't. But I mean, I will say folklore is very inconsistent about this. Sometimes it's like somebody will come along and be nice like this, and they'll be like, you should have known that was the devil, and now your feet are your head, and you're going to crawl on the ground for all eternity in pain. And then other times it's like, no, you obviously should have trusted that random stranger. Like, you get very mixed messages. Uncle Kitty says, I wondered why the devil bargained power in exchange for souls, as anyone who would take his deal was likely his already. I think there's a sense of the devil just enjoys his own cleverness. I mean, I don't want to speak, I mean, obviously these come from different areas with different conceptions, but the devil's a vain creature. That's the most consistent thing about him. And I think he just likes to win. He just likes the ego boost of it. Because of course he's supposed to be trying to undermine God. Well, the Christian God anyways. Zombie Wolf says, well, GS, sometimes the choice isn't really a choice, like saying, oh, you could sell your soul to me to feed your family, or you cannot do that and watch your children starve. But do understand that there are stories in German folklore and in folklore in general where the choice is to watch your family starve. That's the one you should make. And then you have faith in God, and sometimes he saves you, and sometimes it's like a metaphorical ending where you go and be happy in heaven, which just sort of skims over the fact that you all starve to death. But yeah, I wouldn't say it's always that way. Or always views it as a forced choice. Sometimes it's just viewed as a hard choice. Witchery says, shout out to Disney's Beauty and the Beast, where a child not letting in a decrepit stranger got a whole castle cursed. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's very random. That's based on, obviously, a French novel. But the Beauty and the Beast form, that form of story is really prevalent in folklore. The devil is really just where the fair folk would have been prior to Christianity, Witchery says. Yeah, I mean, at least they're credited that way. I would say that's more true of German folklore, although German folklore is kind of all over the map. Like, sometimes you see here Hubeck, who would be a dwarf, who would be as much the good people as anything else, is a hero. And then in other ones, in other accounts, it's just agents of the devil. So, there's that conflict there. Witchery says, I would feed my family, take me to hell. I don't care. Yes. I guess the point I'm trying to make is there is a rather famous dispute in the Bible over that idea between Judas and Jesus. So it's not out of the realm of possibility that the point of the story is you should probably starve to death to save your soul. Okay. I do have another story left. It's probably the least related to my topic here, but I do want to say before I move on here, if you live near Hubechenstein, the rock, could you go ask Hubeck if I could have some of those herbs? Tell him I'm a good person. Big fan of dwarves. Tell him I give a thumbs up to dwarves. Okay. Our last story is called The Doctor with the Billy Goats, which already is a great name. Well chosen, Jurgen. I mostly want to include it because I'm not sure where else I would fit it. And it's a hilarious story to me. I mean, it's kind of a dark story, I should say. It's a story about rejection and revenge. But I don't know. The way it actually fits together, I found a bit funny. Witchery says, furries come at least from ancient Greece. Yep, they sure do. I mean, some version of anthropomorphized people has always been around. Often sexualized. Witchery says, Zeus out there doing work. God, that is literally every story of Zeus. Just every single one. It's just, Zeus was... It's telling, let's say that the king of all the gods was just the sexual assault king of myth. Okay. Our final story tonight is called The Doctor with the Billy Goats. It also comes to us from Jürgen Hubert, whose collection Sunken Castles, Evil Poodles can be supported on his Patreon, which I will have linked down in the pinned comment below. In ancient times, there lived an old doctor in a great building on one of the heights of Eichelberg mountain near Wertheim, which was located about 2 rifle shot from Eicheltor Gate. This doctor was well versed in medicine and other arts, but he did not have a good reputation in the city. He was considered to be a weather mage, and as he lived all alone in the old edifice, people had to believe that he only socialized with witches and spirits. Nobody from town would have visited him if his great aptitude in the healing arts hadn't compelled them to go to his doorstep. There, the visitors had to ring the doorbell, and if the doctor didn't immediately lean his head out of the window to look at the bell ringer, then that was not a good sign. The visitor might as well go home again, for the sick person who had been the reason for the visit was beyond help. But if he leaned out of the window and asked what the visitor wanted, well, the visitor could be in good spirits. The doctor would then visit the patient and give medicine, which was sure to return them to good health. Which makes you think, maybe Rory, you should go and find this man. Hear me out, though. It's not that easy. The strange thing was that the doctor never went to the patient on foot. He always drove there in a small cart, which was pulled by 2 large black billy goats. And one evening, the doctor was in his garden and looked down to the River Main when a large boat full of beautiful maidens traveled downstream who enjoyed themselves by catching fish. In order to observe them closely, he took his spyglass and eyed up one after the other like a total creep. When he had reached the youngest, just adding to his creep status, she made such an impression on his heart that he was beside himself with love's pangs. Sure, love. He observed her as long as he could, and then he noticed that the maidens went ashore fairly close to his home at a mansion, which was located there at Weissachaya Barn, where the Weissachaya Barn is located now. There were 12 of them, one more beautiful than the next, and they lived in their mansions together in sisterly harmony. In 1 week, one of them would cook, and in the next week another, and so forth until the year was over. As soon as a decorous time for a visit had arrived the next morning, the doctor harnessed his billy goats to the cart, drove down to the mansion, and submitted his marriage proposal while lauding all the positive qualities he had to offer. Well, the maidens of the mansion were put into a strange mood after this. They did not know whether they should burst out in laughter or reject the old suitor with his long goatee out of hand. Well, finally, the oldest said, "Give us 3 days in which we can think about it, your wishes. After this time has passed, get back in touch, and then you shall receive our answer." The doctor could not disagree with this, and thus climbed back on his cart, drove away with his billy goats. And after 3 days had passed, the billy goat drawn cart once again stood in front of the mansion. And the maidens, surrounded by many girls from the city which they had invited to the festivities, welcomed the suitor to the decorated gate and led him up to the splendid saloon. Here a figure covered completely by a dress with a veil sat on a chair, and the doctor was told that he ought to lift the veil and embrace his bride. Who was more eager to do this than the doctor? Quickly he stepped closer and lifted the veil from the concealed figure. But good heavens! Instead of a beautiful maiden, an old cat looked at him and welcomed him with a loud meow. This mockery enraged the doctor so much that he burst out of the mansion while panting for revenge. Climbing on his goat-drawn cart, he drove home like storm and thunder. There he searched for the strongest incantations in his books and hurried back to the mansion where there were still merry celebrations between 11 and 12 o'clock in order to put his revenge into motion. "Be that what you mocked me with," he shouted angrily, and as he stepped into the circle with the numerous girls and unleashed his spells, then suddenly all the girls were transformed into cats, which now ran away with loud cries. Meow. Additionally, a storm arrived. And it was so strong that it seemed that if the world would end, the main surged as if the world would end. The main surged like during the greatest floods and washed out the foundations of the mansion's tower that crashed down with a great crack. The next morning, nothing was visible of the mansion other than the half-destroyed side wing, which was later transformed into a barn, still known as the Weissachaya, and can be found at the same location with 1565 as the year of construction written on its walls. But that this barn used to be something else in earlier times can still be discerned by the fact that the roof beams and the spaces between them have been painted over, which is not the usual practice for barns. It is also certain that large treasures are still hidden in the foundations of the building. Within living memory, people saw the upper part of a walled-over entrance to a cellar next to a pillar. The cellar led deep beneath the riverbed of the Main, and whoever gains entrance to the cellar could make their fortune. But you would have to be a blessed Sunday child, in other words, born on a Sunday, which has special significance in German lore, for otherwise you would be unable to attain the treasure. Most likely you wouldn't be able to see it. The Sunday children usually can see things that others can't. Usually spirits, but in this case, treasure. The maidens of the mansion also have not yet been released from their curse. They can still be seen as cats from time to time within the building itself or in its vicinity. The most knowledgeable in this was Shrek, the old fisherman, a respected man who was usually called the Milanese, and during his life as Milanese thunderstorm was his favorite swear word, which he used frequently. Obviously, like most swears, that doesn't translate. I don't understand how that's a swear word, but it's hilarious. One time he moored his boat at the shore near the Weissachaya between 11 and 12 o'clock at night in order to conduct a small bit of business, and when he returned to climb back into his boat, he saw that it was now full of cats. "Milanese thunderstorm, what is this?" he bellowed. "Are the cats master of the boat, or is it Shuck? Get out! Get out!" But the cats did not get out. Instead, they kept calmly sitting inside and only looked at him with glowing eyes. Then he picked up stones as he could find them, large and small, and sought to drive away his unwelcome naval company, but to no avail. Either the stones flew at too high an arc or too low, and to make it short, none of the many hundreds of stones he threw fell into the boat, even though he was very close to it. And when he was tired from the throwing, he thought, I shall see how this continues. He thus stood quietly and observed the cat in his boat for 3 hours until finally a rooster crowed nearby. Do we have a rooster? No. There you go. And then the cats were gone as if blown away. Now the doctor with his billy goats can likewise be seen from time to time. The utter humiliation which he'd been subject to does not allow him to rest in his grave. Every year on the day when his courtship had come to such a nasty end, he drives down the Eichelsteig road between 11 and 12 o'clock from the spot where his home used to be, and the wheels of his cart eject sparks by the handful. And the billy goats spit fire, and their eyes shine like glowing coals. And as soon as he approaches the Weisse Shire, the wings of its gate fly open as if a great storm wind blows them apart, and the doctor drives inside and hunts the cats from room to room, and returns to his abode on the heights when the roosters crow. Old men still remember that 60 or 70 years ago a remnant of the doctor's home was still present. It was a subterranean chamber about 20 to 25 feet deep, into which the boys had herded their pigs on the Eichelsteig, fled during bad weather. Since then, the detritus was removed and a summer house was built on the spot, from which there is a splendid view of the main river valley. Zombie Wolf wants to be treated. Yeah, so here's the problem. Sounds like he probably could treat me. I don't think my condition is so bad that he couldn't. But I think he's a little fixated on the cat thing. And he's also a spirit. I'm not sure if he can still treat me. But I do want to ask chat. What do you think my best shot for getting a cure here is? Should I join the reformists and sign a ledger to the devil and then eat gallons of toads? Should I try to track down a 500-year-old person of history, Paracelsus, and see if he still has those potions handy and is still alive? Should I try to get the king of the dwarves to take some mercy on me and give me herbs? Or finally, should I try to track down the vengeful incel ghost with the billy goats? Witchery says, I vote you live with the witchy cats. They seem cool. Maybe. I mean, they seem to be pretty wealthy, so maybe they were just sort of like, the Kardashians. Hard to say. Jumpstore says, I'd rather have a cat than a spouse. I'm glad I don't have to choose. I don't think I could. Everyone is saying they'll take the kitties. Witchery says, I'm a Saturday child. Oh, no. Oh, no. No, there's no mythology about Saturday children. Zombie Wolf says, apparently your best bet is the devil because he's easily fooled out of his deals. That's a good point. Witchery says, I vote you live with the witchy cats. They seem cool, but they don't cure anything. Can we take the cat to live with the king of the dwarves? That's a point. And then there's a vote for the doctor with the billy goats. I'll be honest. I mean, I'm being a little gruff here, but I'm kind of on the fence as to who's the villain in that story. I mean, that's a really mean way to reject a person. He wasn't really doing anything out of the norm for the time, but at the same time, the psychotic things that would happen when you rejected proposals in folklore, I don't know. I don't think there's any good person in that story, to be honest. His overreaction is I think, inarguable. Witchery says, Saturday's child works hard for a living according to the poem, and I hate it. But it's true, isn't it? GS says the goats all the way. I do like goats. They're chaos incarnate, but I like them. All right. Well, I got through this with less coughing than I expected, but I suspect I will have to pay the piper on that and do a lot more coughing when I leave. Witchery says, I mean, he made the dubious choice of using goats to pull a cart. I mean, I think everybody knows this at this point, but goats are associated to devilry, black goats pulling a cart and whatever. It's never quite, it's not always exactly the devil, but it does show that you have some league with the devil. Zombie Soul Wolf says, what does Monday's child do? Go to work. I don't know. Sunday Child was just because Sunday was a holy day. We talked about Sunday Child a few times. They supposedly can see spirits and ghosts and things like that. I actually don't know what day of the week I was born on. Oh, does anybody actually know the date of my birthday? I'll give you a hint. I started the channel on my birthday. It is a date of significance. And frankly, a fitting one. I'll let people. Zombie Wolf says, I was hoping for something cool. You know what, Zombie Wolf? Folklore is for the people. Write your own mythology. What does a Monday child mean? What is the special thing? No guesses on my birthday before I leave? It's not too far off. It's not close, but it's not too far off. Oh, well. I did want to say, actually, before I leave, I'm sorry if I worried anybody. I stopped posting that I was canceling shows because I had so many new people come by, and I was like, I don't really want to, like, their experience of my channel to be just twice a week, me saying I'm too sick and spamming their feed. So I just stopped doing it. I figured people would put together that I was doing that. But I hope that didn't actually worry anybody. I mean, the only worry is really how trying to get congestion out of the lungs before it turns into something again, bacterial or whatnot. But beyond that, it was just a fairly nasty respiratory thing with a lot of hard coughing that would have been disgusting to listen to. I've never mentioned my birthday, Zombie Wolf. No, unless you've been watching the channel since like this time last year, you probably wouldn't have it. My birthday is April 1st. Never mind the year. And when I was born, a story that I will almost certainly repeat on my birthday, which I don't know how close we get a show to that. Let me check. Well, we have a show on April 2nd, so. When I was born, it was slightly premature, not by much. And my dad tells the story of trying to phone his family and tell them I was born at like 7 a.m. and them going like, ha ha, April Fools, we get it, I'm going back to bed. Zombie Wolf says, did you get a lot of April Fool's jokes growing up? I got a few when I was young, and I cried, and no one did them anymore. So there's a wonderful way to solve that problem. If you don't like pranks, just cry when they happen. All right. Well, that's enough babbling from me. Thank you, everybody who sent the kind wishes, and hopefully I'll sound even better on Thursday. There is a chance I could get worse before Thursday, in which case I will let you know. But nonetheless, thank you to the greatest live chat to ever be recorded in human history. It's just facts. I'll keep the fire warm. You have yourself a good sleep.